going to show my screen. Here we go. All right. So welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about some of the major changes between PIMS 7 and PIMS 8 today. This should be fairly short. There's a few reports that Lee is going to be talking about at a later date. And I think they have a few bugs that need to be worked out anyway. Okay, so I'm going to start with some changes to the staff component, one of which will make a lot of people very happy, I'm sure. So if we look at that, we've got a few new fields. We can actually enter a name now, which I think will help keep track of those staff IDs that associate them with a name. And we've added ethnicity, dates of hire into other roles. This is something that, you know, we have so many people who have multiple hats. It's good to see when they were hired into other roles and what those dates were, and what part of their total time in a month is devoted to that. So here's a record for me as a supervisor, and I had some additional duties as an assessment worker, but it was pretty small. Okay. And tracking the staff roles as a history is on the wish list. That's something that people have asked about. It's a little complicated at this point. One of the important things is that these staff records have a couple of new fields here with the supervising assessment workers and supervising parent support workers. That will figure into what's required as far as trainings and those due dates. And down here at the bottom, we've got some new things for supervision, the date of the first supervision of home visitors and the date of the first supervision of parent survey workers. So just keep those in mind as you're revising your staff records. Okay. Moving on. So now I'm going to go to the training component. You can see that in the past we used to have, training button here on our navigation bar for each individual staff person. But you're going to be so happy to know that now trainings are all by themselves, and so when you're adding a training, if you have multiple people going to the same training, you only have to enter it once, which is good news. So for example, here's a training for our annual child abuse and neglect requirement. And over here we've got staff and attendance. So we can add as many people as we want here. Whoops. Wrong. Sorry, 102. And 105. So all those people went to that training. So now they've got a record for that. And where is that? Way down at the bottom, I think. Yes, here's our annual child abuse and neglect training. Okay. Oh, and when I get over to, now maybe we'll look at it now. I do want to talk about the standard reports menu separately in a little bit, but I am going to show you some of the training reports that have to do with the staff training. So there are new ones. We've got staff training events where you can make a list of what training events have occurred during a certain time period. But also we've got these separate ones for our core trainings, our wraparounds, and so forth. So staff training prior to working with families, that would be your orientation, stopgap, and evaluation tools. So just to look at that for a moment. And so we have some summary information at the top from that staff record on dates that various things happened. And then those topics for the orientation, the various stopgaps, and for evaluation tools down here at the bottom. And we have something similar for, so we've got, those are the orientation topics, staff training within 3 months of hire, those are those 3-month wraparounds, the 6-month wraparounds plus core are in this report. So here for me, I have my regular core and my supervision core listed. And we're having some confusion right now over what and when these due dates should appear. So stay tuned. I'm thinking that as a supervisor, since I'm required to have everything, then I should have due dates for all of these items. I should, you know, I have to take core, I have to take supervision core, and I have to do wraparound. So there should be due dates here for everything. We're working on that. 12 months of hire and ongoing topics. So those are all there as separate reports, and that's very nice to be able to print all those out specifically. And one more thing, we'll be able to, so for these, oh, hold on just a minute. Hold on just 1 minute, please. Josh, 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 Josh. Josh, can you go into the bathroom, please? So sorry, everybody. Okay. And then the staff training events, we will be able to filter that by individual staff and by date range, the training events occurring within a certain time period. The report needs some work. Right now, what I think is it should sort by date, which it's not, and it should also be able to be filtered by worker, and it's not doing that either. So Rob is going to be working on that to make it make more sense in that regard. Okay. All right, so on to outcome instruments. I'm going to go back to site definitions because we've got some new things going on here. So for example, well, let's look at a simple one and a more complicated one. First, for a depression screening like the Edinburgh, we have not only these cutoff scores indicated, so if it's the same, we've got same and different at each time point. So for the Edinburgh, we're going to have the same cutoff score, which is a 10. And it's normal if, oops, that's wrong, if it's at or if it's below the cutoff. So below 10 would be normal. But we do have these choices. Above cutoff, at or above, at or below, and below cutoff. So that's the way the Edinburgh should be. And we'll see in the schedule that that cutoff score is automatically put in for each time point. Now for something like the ASQ, where, so again, we have different cutoff for each time point. And if you're at or above, then that would be normal. And because it's different, we've got all these possibilities of, you know, what the each subscore could be. And it varies depending on the time point. So it's not always 30 for communication. It could be quite different based on the child's age. So you can put those in. They're actually not. Yeah, I was going to say, there is a table.
I will be sending sites a table that shows what the cutoff numbers are that they can fill in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's actually it's a number and a decimal too, so it's not just a whole number, but one time
right.
and that'll do it. Okay, but I've put in a few mock numbers here just to illustrate. Okay, and there are reports that use these scores now, combined with the definition of normal. And I believe, Lee, you're going to be doing an additional webinar for some of these reports, which are...
Yes, I'm working on scheduling that because Virginia's quarterly reporting starting in October is different than previously, and Rob worked very hard to modify the PIMS report so that Virginia sites could get what they need. And so I'm going to do a webinar on going through all the specific reports that are needed and how to run those. That schedule, that webinar request will come out to the sites this week.
Okay, great. And for your future webinar, I'll probably need to sit in. Some of these are, I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of these reports. Okay, some other data entry, and then we'll get to the standard reports. That'll be the last thing. So just a little FYI here. On the home form, service and home visits box has been expanded a little bit. So in addition to first, latest, and final home visits and service start and end dates, we've got presumed and verified retention. So your retention is only verified when you've been terminated. So as long as you're unterminated, then you're presumed to still be active. And then finally, we've added number of home visits and number of prenatal home visits. So that's just a little extra there for you to notice. On depression screens, instead of having the child name to identify who the mother's being screened for depression on, that meant that you couldn't enter a screen prenatally. So now we've got just a time point relative to the pregnancy ID. So A would be your target child's pregnancy or birth. And then if the mom has a subsequent pregnancy, of course the HFA expects us to be doing depression screens on those subsequent pregnancies as well. So now we can associate those records with the pregnancy, whether there's a birth yet or not. So that's a little change there. And one more little data entry thing, going back to site definitions for a moment. Under the site enrollment definition, they've added some information on case size and case weight, the maximum. So that can be adjusted there. And I'm assuming, although I haven't tested it yet, that that's going to apply to those case weight management reports. Okay. Oops. Okay, now on the standard reports, let's go to that because that's the thing that looks the most different. So if you've done a lot of custom queries, you're going to see that the standard report is going to resemble the custom query layout more closely, so the step 1, step 2, and so forth. So just be aware that as you get used to this new layout, you'll need to actually look very carefully at step 1, step 2, see what parameters pop up here, and then also filter activities is separate. So that's another step that you'll need to look at. Because I know when I was first working on 8, I was missing this little corner here on the parameters. So just keep that in mind. And of course, these will change based on the reports you've selected. Various parameters will become available or disappear. And then another big change here is that we can choose how we want to look at the report list. This is the old way with all the different categories, and under each category, all the many different reports that are available. Or if you want to just look at best practice standard reports, you can choose that standard. And then that's a lot less complicated. It's going to be a much smaller subset of reports that you'll need to look at. Okay, so for example, if we're looking at child outcomes, that was a really long list. Child development screens would be much shorter. You don't have to wade through that list. You can just pick the PPS report that you want. Okay, so that's in general, looking at that. Now there's some new reports for outcomes that I want to address. So for looking back at child outcomes. We've got these things: child outcome checkpoints within a date range, child outcome progress since the prior checkpoint. These are things that Lee was saying were to address the Virginia needs specifically. Child outcome scores within normal limits. Because this was I wasn't able to make this work very well as a sample because I was assuming that the ASQs would be on there, but they're not yet. It's just KIPS and some other generic child outcomes. So those are new, and Lee is going to be having a specific webinar to address those. And there was one more, and where is that buried? That is under custom other states, the Virginia medical providers by age 2, 2 months. And so for this quarter, how many children turned 3 months and how many had a medical provider assigned during that quarter. We'll address that particular need. So that, just keep in mind that that's where it is. It's under custom other states for that report. Let's see the list of child outcomes. So scores within normal limits. I think I just have one picture here. So just seeing what pops up. We've got our case status. They're currently presumed active. We can specify target children, all staff, or select staff. And then the outcomes measured between, and looking in this particular date range. And I just made up some data. So that's what this report will look like. Just remember that it includes KIPS and generic child outcomes. If the checkpoint and schedule information has been configured, it has to be in site definitions, both those things, checkpoints and the schedule, for this to work. So looking at checkpoints, if the child's old enough, what the score was, the cutoff, what's the normal definition, and so forth. So that's a new report available for you folks. Then here I go into the checkpoints. Checkpoints within a date range. So this is just looking at if the child has reached certain checkpoints within that date range, how many screens were expected, how many were completed on time, and how many overall. For the various screening tools. Okay. And the child outcome progress, this was a real bear, trying to understand. Oh, excuse me, I need to fix the date range. I decided that the way to understand this is similar to the retention volume year, because it was a little counterintuitive as I was just looking at the report as it stands. The before prior checkpoint, before latest checkpoint, and between prior and latest checkpoint was a little difficult to understand. So it's based on the date range you selected. Were there any checkpoints before the beginning of that date range? That's what this box means. And then before the latest checkpoint, that would be something that this child would have been at 41 months, would have had a checkpoint at 37 months for the ASQ. So the prior one would be 25. And then the current one, the latest one would be 37 months. So this would be between 25 and 37 months. That's the last column. So a little tricky to interpret, and I'm sure this is going to that you're going to benefit from this in the end for your requirements for Virginia.
I will end up going into this in some detail because this was Rob and I worked on this, and just reading it's not easy to interpret it, but the main thing that it is for, we're now having to report for the ASQs if they were due during the recent quarter, did they get them done? And this is the methodology of sorting out, was it, were the ones that they had done before their most recent checkpoint, before the previous checkpoint or before the latest, and the difference between those tells you whether they got done what they should have in the most recent quarter that you're looking at. So all that will become more clear when I've written it out and sent it out, and when I talk about it during the upcoming webinar.
Great. And I see somebody asked about, is there a place to put the number of training hours? The answer is yes. That didn't change. That's still there in the training record. Okay. Yeah. And Lee, you had said something about there being a memo field in the training record, just notes on covered, but I don't see that yet. Maybe that's something that Rob's planning to put in. Okay. So that's a quick. There we go. So that's a quick overview of the highlights. So any questions? Please just make sure you include me on your webinar for these reports.
I'm making a note to include you on that.
Thank you. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, I thank you all for coming out today, and we will be working on some upgrades yet on a few of these reports.
One more thing, I sent out the forms to excuse me, the PIMS 8 site form updates to the sites, and in that file there are several forms that say revised, and those forms would have minor changes to them. The training form, because it now is done as you set up the training that you gave and then show what people attended, and instead of putting in a training for each person, that training form is marked as new. So make sure you look at those forms as you start implementing PIMS, and then we'll, if there are any questions, certainly ask me about them. Thanks, Eileen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Take care.